Welcome to the Data Edit, the podcast for data-forward thinkers. Hosted by Agile's Ben Howarth, Head of AI, and Olly Seger, Account Director, we explore the challenges, innovations and trends shaping the data landscape. From governance and ESG to AI ethics, cloud migration and analytics, discover how data is driving real business value.
Good to have you back with us. I hope you've enjoyed some of the previous content that we've talked about. Just wanted to touch on something I thought very topical before it becomes yesterday's news. It's still front and fore in my thoughts, which was the Ryder Cup. A scary Sunday afternoon and evening. But since watching, I've been watching a lot of content from the leaders, Ben, and what they've been telling me is that an underestimated character within the management structure of the European Ryder Cup team is Eduardo Molinari, and he's the data guy, funny enough. Got me thinking about some of the things that the European Ryder Cup team in the first 2 days, the foursomes and four balls golf, had done with the data and how they'd analysed some of the data, of which there's vast amounts related to performance and type of golf ball, how far certain players hit the ball, and who drives better, who chips better and pitches and putts better, etc., etc. And it felt like to me that the obvious statement here was that the European, really relating back to what we said in the previous episode about using data for the right and positive outcomes. And it felt like the Europeans, and Eduardo Molinari in particular, as that sort of data leader for the European team, was figuring out what he wanted to achieve and how to get the best score from the teams on every single hole, and analysing players' performance, not just who got on with who, but similar types of golf ball, same golf ball they use in the alternate shot format. But having a reason to analyse the data for an outcome. And it felt, whilst the American team had access to no doubt all the same information and levels of data, because I'm sure it's all captured in similar places, they maybe didn't use the data for the same positive reasons and trying to find those outcomes which will deliver ultimately. I'm slightly smiling now, the result that us Europeans wanted, even though it was a tense Sunday. I just wanted to touch on that in terms of real world experience of outside of necessarily it's a business to them, of course, but that's a social thing for me to watch. How that can be perceived, that we've used the data positively to drive a positive outcome. So what's your thoughts? Do you kind of agree with that sentiment? I'd be interested to know in 2 years' time whether the Americans have learned anything from that and start analysing that data in a similar way, or whether they try and pinch Eduardo Molinari onto their team, which I don't think would be allowed. But interesting way to look at it, I think.
I think it's a really interesting way to look at it. I think the whole data aspect probably is far more familiar from a Formula One style.
Yeah.
It wasn't that long ago. Cars didn't have all these sensors on them, and now they're absolutely rammed with them. They predict pit stops and the microseconds, all that kind of stuff, and they know where they're going to. So it was always going to roll on to, I think, other sports. I think it's really interesting, your observation that actually it's been used, and it was kind of publicly known to be used this time because there was a data specialist there.
Yeah.
And it has kind of. Well, it hasn't kind of. It has won the Ryder Cup and has retained it. Probably fair to say some of the most difficult and challenging environment, shall we say, for a team. I think what's really kind of. I was just trying to remind myself quickly with Google search. I think what's really kind of prominent just came to the front of my head is it's not the first time I've heard about that from a sports statistics type of way. So categorizing those kind of sports, Formula One is a technical sport. It is, and always has been, down to the micron, the size of the bolt, how tight it is, the torque, etc., etc. They're all measurable items and attributes that exist within that type of sport. Whereas a more human strength physical sport, such as golf, there's less things you can measure. Cars are all made to be the same length, the same weight, the same height. They have the same size fuel tank, etc., etc. Whereas you and me might appear similar on screen, but we're actually quite different in real life. And we're different people, and that would have a difference in the way that you and I play golf. But what it also just reminded me of, and I think your question around will it move into the next round of the Ryder Cup is an interesting one. So in America, there's a film I love, which is called Moneyball.
Right.
And it's all about baseball. And I'm literally just reading the bit because I'm reminding myself. It was Oakland Athletics. And there was a chap who went there who took all the statistics of players, regardless of where they were in the league, and worked out the best team for the smallest amount of money. And that was based on such similar characteristics to what you're saying.
Yeah.
It's a resonance going across about, if this person pitches second or if this person bats fourth in the lineup, they always, and it was all about this, and it's very similar.
Yeah.
Red Sox went on to win a few years later. Oakland Athletic never actually won the championship. They got to the final, I believe. They never actually won.
Yeah.
Red Sox did it. And it was belief from the top down. Again, an interesting comparison to the Ryder Cup team. In the management believed in the data, and the Red Sox believed in the data and pushed it down into the team and into the team's planning.
Yeah, it's a good point. That's a good point. Yeah, it's got to filter from the top. It always has to. I'd even give you another example, and this is going back ages. So this is not a new thing. We all know that. The 3 England rugby team was Clive Woodward, Sir Clive Woodward, as he is now. Had some data to say that a lot of tackles in rugby, or percentage of tackles in rugby, were made by people grabbing onto shirts. So they were, player was almost away, dive, grab shirt, bring player down, stop the attack or whatever. So what did he do? He decided to go to, I think it was Nike, whoever it was, and asked them to design a tight-fitting rugby shirt for that particular World Cup, which obviously England went on to win, which I was extremely excited and pleased about. But it's just using those extra things to give you a competitive advantage, but having statistics and data to back it up, to say if we now address that percentage of tackle in rugby will now not be possible. Therefore, we have an advantage as a team and as individual players. And my word, it's now what everyone wears these tight shirts. So I'm lucky I don't play rugby anymore, because I'm sure it would make me look rather foolish. But yeah, it goes back away. But again, it just highlights and reiterates that whole message from the last session about finding a thing or a problem within a business you're trying to solve, something that's not working as you need it to, or an improvement you need to make, and understanding if data can be one of the solutions and the answer to addressing it, and then measuring that success. So it's it kind of all ties in, and that's a little bit what this podcast is about, is trying to bring things to life and make them understandable for your Joe public, and certainly for me. So what else has been on your mind then, Ben? What's been in your inbox? What have you been looking up?
So I'll ask you to bear with me on this one. I know that I've explained this one to you before.
It's not me; it's the people listening to the podcast that need to be patient.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm gonna do my best. So please, if you think that I missed a step, call it out.
Sure.
I'll try and recap it. But I have a theory which seems to come true more regularly than not, about basically the ever decreasing circle of AI. And that's not to say that AI itself is getting smaller. What I mean by that is we put a lot of training data together, whether we're using other AI agents to build that training data, and passing it into our final agent, or whether we're actually using captured data from business systems and warehouses and databases and extracting the data so that we can basically train that tool to work out and act in a specific way. And I think the best example here is probably the famous chatbots that lots of people now use on the web. They're famous for almost taking in the entire internet. I mean, quite often you hear about that's how much training data has gone into it. We've taken the internet in, pass it through parameters to remove biases and to remove things that everyday Joe Bloggs does not want to see. But it's still a vast quantity of data. And my theory around the ever-decreasing circle literally comes from as you interact with these agents, your response to the results that they give you is either a positive or a negative affirmation. There's nothing in there which is actually neutral. So if you think about it from kind of like a very basic way, you ask a question, you get a result, there's a little thumbs up in the bottom corner. You're ticking that to say, yeah, perfect answer, thanks very much. That result is stored. That actually goes on to create a positive result against that answer. Now, there will be questions that only ever get asked once, but more often than not, the same question gets asked multiple times. I mean, it's the way that search engines have worked in the background. They know what people are searching on a daily basis, how many people have searched for what happened in the news yesterday, et cetera, et cetera. And they used to bring that to the top. And our AI agents work in exactly the same way. And the more positive affirmations you give to a certain response or type of response, the more that comes to the forefront. And the more negative, or no, that wasn't quite right, no, do that answer again, no, that's not the result I was looking for, they get pushed to the back. So the amount of training data slowly gets smaller and smaller and smaller because we actually know what the positive answer is. Or should I say the accepted answer that everyone accepts as that's a good answer. And where it came from was even in the previous, one of the podcasts we've done to date, we talked about how much data there is, how many data centers we need to actually keep all that data, the fact that that data doubles every 2 years, and then 50% of that data is dark, and then a further 30-35% of it is termed as rot. It's just still obsolete, trash. So 80% of that data that we store potentially is just not used. And what I think, and where I'm going with all of this, is that ever-decreasing circle of AI actually also gets down to only 20% of the training data we put in is actually valuable as a result as it comes out. And I think those two kind of ratios balance out really well to actually say, maybe that 80% of data, we are testing it, we are looking at it, we are cataloging it in some way. But actually, it's not very good. It's actually just rubbish.
So I guess what you're so in my head, the way I'm seeing what you're saying is I ask a question to one of the online globally known AI chatbots and I get a response. I'm then prompted with that response, do you want me to do this with it, that with it, whatever? Or I may think, actually, I need this with a slightly different spin on it. So I ask another question. It's the same response getting smaller and smaller. The data set that's providing that response getting effectively smaller and smaller. So using less data. But I guess so does that mean that you're seeing that potentially there's kind of a new training that needs to be considered here in order to verify that requirement for the internet of data, as opposed to a smaller training subset of asking queries, and your queries being longer, more succinct to the point, and actually spend more time putting your query in to the chatbot to get a more accurate first time answer out, because the more information you put in, the smaller the subset it needs to go to find the answer. So does that make sense?
It does make sense, and I think when you look at it as just you're doing it, it probably seems a bit is that really going to have a massive impact on everything? But actually, when you think there's 6 billion of us on this planet, and probably 5 billion of us have access to these chatbots, the same question must be being asked more than once.
You bet.
And that in its own right is then you're saying that's a good answer. I say that's a good answer to a very similar question. That answer's now got 2 affirmations. Maybe we turn down 2 other answers as well, which would therefore, from a pool of 6 possible answers, we've ended up with 2 good ones. So we've reduced that.
Yeah.
We've reduced the requirements, the indexing, the search for requirements already by what, 3-fold? And it just gets smaller and smaller, and you end up with a pinnacle. In my head, anyway, we end up with this pinnacle or an ever-decreasing circle of data, which is actually good and accurate. And we self-validate it because we all go around asking these questions, and we all go around giving these positive and negative affirmations. We self-validate this data set, this central data set that's the answers. That's how we use it. And
so
I think
there's it.
I was just going to say, I think it's kind of, I'd be interested to hear what people's thoughts are against it or for it.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say as well, I think sometimes we, as the prompter or the person putting the query into the ChatGPT, are probably just asking lazy questions as well. So we're therefore not helping ourselves if we're talking sustainability, requirement of hosting all this and housing all this vast amounts of growing data. If we spend more time on the initial prompt rather than a quick, easy prompt or query, whatever, and response comes back, and we're almost waiting for it to advise us what we should then say next because of the training data that's in there, I guess, there's a bit of an onus on us as the users of those models to be more descriptive about what we are actually asking and what response we are hoping to receive. So I think that's a really interesting point, and that obviously all plays back into the data as these things will always do. But yeah, the ever decreasing circles, I like it.
But it also plays back into the whole theme and where we started with this podcast at the beginning around ESG and sustainability, because spending 5 minutes to actually write your prompt, and it is kind of quite funny. Like 6 months ago, maybe a bit more than that, in fairness, there was a new engineer came out on the market, and that engineer was a prompt engineer. People specifically designing prompts to ask and answer the right questions, and then that's now gone further, where they actually translate our questions into prompts to help get the right answers. And there's there's intermediate layers before you actually get to the model itself. Translates and transfers to get to that right response. But asking these chatbots for huge, great big analysis pieces, and then to go, oh, actually, do that again, but do it with this. The amount of compute that we're using,
of course,
by not being succinct in that first prompt. Maybe it's going to get right first time every time, but
and you have to validate the response as well. Of course, that's a super important point to make as well. Even if you have prompted the most long, very accurate, detailed, query prompt into the search engine, you still need to validate the response, right? That's a super important point to make. But yeah, you get nearer to what you're after. Absolutely right. Yeah.
I think there's also a piece where use it to your advantage. So I write huge prompts, like that sort of very A4 prompts, but I'm very specific in what I'm asking for. But I will actually ask the chatbot to validate my prompt.
Yeah.
So before it even runs it, I'm asking it, do you understand what this is asking for?
Yeah.
Is there any areas of greyness that you need me to be more definitive upon, more succinct about the type of, So I am trying to generate, and probably I might go through 3 or 4 iterations of prompt, but I am trying to generate one response that I'll then validate. Now that validation, your answer, right, that validation may actually lead to further questions, which there's something in there that I don't quite believe or agree with. Is that getting to a one good result?
Yeah.
And again, the decreasing circle, because I'm relying on other people to have asked the same questions. These engines know this is a good answer.
Yeah. And I think the other thing, just a final point on this as well, that whilst some chatbots and versions of chatbots are still free, it doesn't. You can ask lots of prompts, right? Because they're free. When they at some point become fully chargeable, you need to be asking one prompt that's as accurate based on the response you're hoping to receive as possible, because I don't know how some of them are likely to be charged, the model for charging, but if it's consumption based, number of queries, for example, and you may know the answer to this, so I don't know, but that again, it just reiterates the fact: ask one question, maybe validate that question before you ask it, and then send it through and see what happens. Validate the answer, but without there being huge amounts of interaction, following prompt after prompt after prompt to get to the outcome and the response you're looking for.
Yeah, consumption will be the way forwards. I think you're right with that call there. That's going to be the marker for the cloud and how things are done. But yeah, I think there's lots of work that people can do to help get to that point. And the more articles I see now coming as well through on all the social media channels to actually talk about, do you know how to prompt? To ask for this stuff. But it's interesting. It's important.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think prompt training as well. Maybe that's a thing. I mean, it'd be interesting to hear what the viewers, stroke listeners, thoughts are on some of these topics we talked about today. I really wanted to talk about that. There's a big subject that we need to talk about, Ben, and that's the government agreement with the US in terms of power supply and some of the current government initiatives around data centers, energy, etc., which without doubt are an episode entirely independent. So listen, I think that's been a really good catch up and some good real life use cases for data, starting with Ryder Cup, ending with how to prompt effectively into some of these chatbots. And I think we should definitely cover off some of the in the next episode, come off some of these political agreements that have been signed. Dangerous, I know, but we can try in our own ways. Yeah. So once again, thanks everyone. As I said at the end of every session, thanks for listening, watching. Look forward to catching up with you on the next Data Edit. See you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Data Edit. If you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to follow the show and share it with your network. You'll find more resources, insights, and upcoming episodes at agile.co.uk.